So it seems like we're being presented this idea that it's inevitable that we're going down this transhumanist AI post-human world. We're going down this conveyor belt towards this future, and I think it's people like you and me are saying, "Look, we don't have to go down this conveyor belt. It's not
No, we don't.
inevitable." But if we were to stay on this dystopian, tyrannical, globalist conveyor belt, where does that lead? Like a generation from now, if we don't make a change and they usher in the future that these elites want,
Mhm.
these technocrats, what are we looking at?
Yeah, so I would encourage people if they want to essentially know what's planned in that scenario, to go and read the book written by Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO I mentioned earlier, and Henry Kissinger, called The Age of AI, Our Human Future. So essentially there they frame a lot of stuff as warnings, but if you have any idea into who Eric Schmidt and Henry Kissinger are, and what they've done in their careers, they don't really seem very concerned about some of the impacts they claim to be concerned about to me, but that's just me personally. But there are some things they say in there that objectively do consider careful consideration. So one of those is that, AI will they say, invariably lead to a division of society. Essentially, they don't use this term, but I will use it, into classes of haves and have-nots. But the way they define it is a little different. So sort of this more elite tier would be the people that determine AI's objective function, that program and develop AI and understand what AI does to people. And then the lower class presumably would be much larger, and that is the class that AI will act upon, but people will lose the ability to know what AI is doing to them. And they argue that this process of people losing the ability to know what AI is doing to them will happen because of this phenomena they refer to as cognitive diminishment, which is sort of this idea that's pretty easy to verify. If you don't do if you stop doing mental math and use a calculator all the time, it gets harder and harder and harder to do mental math. And the same is true for really like any skill that you don't practice. So they argue that because of the convenience of AI and how it's been creeping into our lives, and I think we've seen this a lot since the advent of generative AI, it will become harder and harder and harder and eventually impossible for people to do certain things, including make decisions for themselves, because the AI will tell you where to go. It will tell you what music to listen to. It will tell you what clothes to buy. And essentially, that's their vision. People will eventually lose the ability to make those decisions for themselves or even develop their own preferences without the assistance of artificial intelligence. And so obviously the way to fight against that is to not outsource all of your decision making and skills to that. And unfortunately, I think as we've seen with the rise of generative AI, people are creating less. People are outsourcing their creativity to AI, have AI make art for me, have AI write things for me. And eventually that leads to a world where in a generation, people don't know how to create art or create music or write without AI. And what does that ultimately mean for humanity? Then essentially we do end up in sort of this helpless state where we become dependent on machines to function. But it only happens if we voluntarily give ourselves over to that type of system and decline to use the abilities granted to us by our consciousness and our souls, and decide to let machines do it for us and have them become the creators and have us just be processors for AI, batteries like the Matrix. I mean, I don't know, but I'd rather not see that come to fruition. And I think the way to avoid that is very easily within the hands of anybody, regardless of your economic status or what your skills are. Everybody can create something. Maybe you whittle things out of wood. Maybe you make music. Maybe you make art, visual art, or other, woven art. I don't know. There's all sorts of things people do. People have always been creating ever since we've existed as a species. And I think if we surrender that, then the post-human future would be an inevitability. And that's essentially what these people are hoping for. And I think it's important for people to fight against that. And I think when people talk about resisting this agenda, this is something that inherently gets left out of that discussion. And I don't think it should be at all. Because again, I don't think people are really reading what a lot of these architects of AI policy are thinking and saying. People are just willingly using it because it's convenient, it's easy, but without really thinking about long-term consequences. And I'm sure people that have been using generative AI, I don't know, in independent media to generate content for your site, has it gotten harder to write those things after using it for a year? Probably. For those people, I would wager. And that type of phenomena is only going to get worse. And what happens when we can't even think for ourselves anymore? Because stopping creating, not being able to write, eventually you're not going to be able to think without the help of this algorithm. And again, as I mentioned earlier, AI is prone to hallucinating, seeing realities that aren't there, and all sorts of things. And how deep could we get dragged into some sort of artificial illusion if we sort of outsource our thinking and our creativity to this type of entity? It's kind of funny because Schmidt and Kissinger argue that these hallucinated realities, AI seeing realities that humans can't observe, mean that the reality must be real because AI is so much more intelligent than us, so that we should believe, whatever it sees that's unobservable. And I don't know, maybe that could be true in some instances, but since there's no way to verify, do we really want to shape society around what could be hallucinations of some, human created machine, just because, certain people that are powerful in society have an almost religious like devotion to artificial intelligence? I don't think that makes any sense, personally.
It's funny. A lot of these people are like staunch atheists, but they're saying that they're creating a god here. But one thing it's like a muscle. What you're saying is like, if you don't use your muscle, if AI is doing all the lifting for you, you're going to atrophy. And
Yeah.
I think it's twisted because AI is doing all this creative stuff. It's making the paintings, the music, the art.
Uh-huh.
And here I am doing dishes. And I'm like, why isn't the AI doing the dishes? Why is it doing all the stuff I want
Yep.
to do? I'm an artist and a video creator. And one of the most common questions people ask me is, aren't you worried that AI is going to be able to do what you do really soon? And I am a little concerned. And for me, the work behind the art adds a lot of value to it. So like when I see a movie
Absolutely.
that took years to make, and like Lord of the Rings, where they went to such great effort to make that movie, and
Uh-huh.
it took Tolkien 10 years to write the book. There's tremendous meaning there for me. And I asked somebody, I was like, if Lord of the Rings was made in 2 seconds with AI, would that change the meaning for you? And there were some people, I'm surprised, some people are like, no, I just want the product. I just want the final product. I don't care about the
Yeah, a
backstory.
lot of people are like that, but I think those people may just already not really be already have the atrophy of creativity that I just sort of mentioned. But ultimately, when you engage in a creative act, what are you filling up or fulfilling, or what muscle, as you put it, are you using? I would argue it's your soul, right? If you just have AI make it, the person that's making it doesn't get the same type of feeling they get if they actually like engaged in the act of making art themselves or with another human. So if we let our souls atrophy because we're not doing anything that have been fulfilling to human souls for thousands of years, what does that ultimately mean? It's interesting in that same Schmidt Kissinger book, they basically say that AI taking over will lead to one of two consequences. One of them is that the peasants rise up and overthrow the elite. That's one scenario, and probably not the scenario that Schmidt and Kissinger want. And then the second scenario is that AI spawns the creation of a new religion. So out of those two allegedly inevitable scenarios per those people, obviously I think it's quite clear, if you're familiar with the backgrounds of Schmidt and Kissinger, the outcome they want is that it creates a new religion. So we atrophy our souls and creativity in that spark that makes us human and outsource it to AI, and then it becomes a new religion. I mean, it's pretty crazy. It makes me think of the Greek myth of Narcissus, where he falls in love with his falls in love with his reflection. You know, that would definitely be a way that gets us to that post-human future, and it's something I think people should resist, because there's something important about humanity. There's obviously a reason that there's sort of this push to sort of snuff that out, and I think ultimately it leads to a world where humans are just easily controlled and essentially either harvested for data, harvested for energy, harvested for something, and not creators anymore. And it's up to anybody if they choose what path they choose to go down, whether they're going to go down the path of someone who creates and can manifest, and who can actively do things and actively make decisions and have preferences and do these things that ultimately are part of what defines humans, right? Or if they're going to go down the path of I'm going to be lazy essentially and let these machines do everything for me, but then you become either not necessarily even part of the machine, you end up, instead of the machine serving you, you end up serving the machine. And I think that's how we get to digital slavery quite fast if too many people take that path. So I think there's a lot of things people can do to, resist these agendas. But I think that is a very easy and very important thing for people to do and consider.
Yeah, I like the dichotomy of what you said, where there's going to be the people that control AI, and then there's the people that are controlled by AI. And
Mm-hmm.
like, what is your approach to AI? Are you like, let's reject it all and live in a cabin in the woods, or are you like, we need to get ahead of this thing? Like, what's your philosophy?
Well, I have how I live personally. I personally don't use it at all, but I have a great assistant that helps run my website, and a huge part of my business, who's an amazing person, and she finds it very useful for certain tasks. And I'm certainly not going to judge someone for using artificial intelligence, but I think again it's that slippery slope thing. How far down the if you don't use it, you lose it thing do you want to go? And obviously, I think there's ways to interact with AI where you're not really at risk of necessarily succumbing to that, but I think there are use cases where people may be. And it really ultimately depends into how connected you are, into how suggestible you are as it relates to your, your devices and your apps and things like that. So, I'm not really in the business of judging people or telling them how to live their lives. But, me personally, I just don't really have a place for it. I never plan to use it in my writing or for my research. As I mentioned much earlier in this podcast, I sort of started off doing, like farm stuff. I like being outside and not necessarily always in front of a screen. Obviously, doing a lot of writing and work over the past few years, I've been on screens a lot more than I definitely was in prior phases of my life. And I think at some point I'd, like to get back to that. And I can't really think of anything personally in my life where I find AI very useful, but I know that's not the case for everyone, because not everyone has the lifestyle or career or preferences that I do, But I think, again, it's people need to have red lines about this type of stuff and just be aware of the risks. And if there's skills you have that are important to you, do your best to, maintain them. If you want to use AI occasionally because you're in a pinch to generate something, that's not going to screw you over long term necessarily, but if you become reliant on it and that's all you use, and then after a year or something, yeah, you probably will see a difference. And their vision, the Kissinger-Smith vision, is that this will happen on a society level and that people will become, as they say, cognitively diminished. That does not sound positive. That does not sound good. So if you choose to use AI, I would urge you to make sure that you're not cognitively diminishing yourself, whatever that means for you.